Hello. Hello, please. Yeah, what's the problem, sir? We just drove down our farm track. Yeah. Go and feed our pheasants. We come across a Range Rover with 3 people in it. Yeah. It appears that they're dead. I don't know what's happening. Blood in the motor all over them.
And welcome back to a new video on the Essex Boys case. As always, if you are enjoying the content, please do give the video a thumbs up. And if you're interested in the Essex Boys case, or simply true crime in general, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. Within 2 weeks, Nicholls had sold all the cannabis he'd helped to smuggle into the country and was knocking on Steele's door to get some more. He had an extensive customer base, supplying dealers across Braintree and the rest of Essex, as well as London and Cambridge. But he kept it restricted to friends and colleagues. Despite steady sales, the new venture failed to be the boost to his income he had hoped. Darren Nicholls states, "I had to be very careful about who I sold it to, and I never wanted to get out of control. I was only too well aware of the fact that I fitted the profile of a typical drug dealer. I had several cars, albeit all of them old and tatty. I seemed to live well beyond my means and had a large number of visitors each day from my wife's large family, friends and the people I employed, and that was even before I actually started to be one. But selling to the people you knew made it harder to keep it a proper business. I was giving people credit and discounts, the money was coming in dribs and drabs. I'd expected to have £2,000 in my hand to buy a decent car or something. Instead, I just got a few quid here and there and a load of hassle. On paper, I was doing well, but I had no idea how long I was going to have to wait for the money to come in, so I was pretty stuck." Nicholls paid off a few bills, bought his kids some clothes and took his wife out to the cinema, but by the end of the month he was just as broke as ever. So when Steele called in October and asked him to do another run, he was more than up for it. He got even more keen when Steele explained that because Corey was on holiday, he wanted Nicholls to be in charge and find someone to go out to Amsterdam with him. A specific amount of money was never mentioned, but Mick implied that as he was taking on more responsibility, Nicholls would be paid a higher fee. Darren Nicholls states, "As soon as I found out we were off again, I went out and bought a pair of chest waders. I'd got really soaked the last time from trying to push that boat back out to sea and didn't want that to happen again. Over the next few days I kept asking Mick who would be in the boat with him. The whole scam about coming back into the harbour having dumped the drugs off relies on having at least 2 people in the boat. You can hardly claim to be out diving on your own, can you? Mick said he was sorting it out. The day before we were due to set off, Mick called me up on his mobile and said that he couldn't find anyone to come back in the boat with him, so I would do it. He could tell I wasn't keen, so he launched into this big thing to try and convince me. He was going on about how he wanted to expand the business, how he wanted to go back to using 2 boats, and how he needed someone who would be able to get across the channel on their own. Basically, he was saying he wanted me to experience it so that I could see if I liked it, and if I did, well that's where the real money was. It'll be worth your while, Darren, promise." Either I was blinded by greed or just feeling in a generous mood, I said yes. The next day, Mick gave me £70,000 and gave me strict instructions to try and get grass rather than resin, even though it was bulkier and a lot harder to handle. There was, of course, method in his madness. Mick charged £300 per kilo to import drugs. It didn't matter what he was importing, that was the amount he charged. Because grass was a bit cheaper per kilo than resin, it meant that we came back with an extra 30 kilos or so, which meant that Mick earned an extra £9,000 for taking exactly the same risk. Clever boy, old Mick. I took my mate Christian and we took the overnight ferry from Felixstowe to Zeebrugge and then drove to Amsterdam. Mick told me he had phoned Dopey Harris a couple of days earlier to tell him to expect me, so when I got to the bar and he wasn't around, I knew he'd be on his way. Harris arrived on his push bike at around 10 AM looking a bit mean and serious, guided me up to the flat above the bar and then started tearing into me. He was ranting and raving about the fact that Mick was going to get us all arrested, that he was not being careful enough on the phone and making it too obvious what he was doing. "That loudmouth motherfucker's going to get us all arrested one day," he said. "For a bloke with his kind of background and experience, he doesn't half run his mouth off. When you get back, you tell him to watch what he says, otherwise he's going to have to find himself another supplier." Once the bollocking was out of the way, we got down to business. We agreed a price for the grass, and then Harris asked me what car I was driving and where I'd parked it. I told him, he then asked for my keys. "Now piss off and enjoy yourself for a couple of hours," he told me. When we got back, the car was in the same place. I went to see Harris and he said everything was fine and gave me back my keys. And that was that. We set off for a bit, then stopped off down a side street and checked the boot. 3 nylon laundry bags full of grass. So I called Mick's mobile. I told him we were on our way and headed off to Blankenberg. Mick and the boat arrived at the rendezvous at dusk, sticking out like a sore thumb because it wasn't as dark as the time before. But Christian and I loaded the boat and I got in. I was trying to pretend that I was really cool about it, but the truth was I was really excited about being in the boat at long last. I was a bit pissed off that I'd missed out on the sea trials, but I was hoping that this would more than make up for it. I wasn't disappointed. When we sped off, it was the most incredible sensation. There was loads of noise and spray flying up all over the place, and because we were so low down, it felt like we were going 1,000,000 miles an hour. Mick was in front and I was directly behind him. The sea was really calm, as flat as a pancake, and in half light you could see for miles. It was like being on some gigantic pond. Absolutely fantastic. After about 10 minutes, when we were all out of sight of Blankenberg Beach, Mick stopped the boat and started fishing around in a bag. "Here, put this on," he said, handing me a buoyancy aid. "The weather's not too clever ahead, so you better wear it. Unfortunately, I've only got one life jacket and I'm wearing that." As I put the buoyancy aid on, I had a good look at Mick. I saw that as well as the life jacket, he was wearing a full dry suit, proper boating clothing. He also had a safety line attached to the console, so if he fell in, he wouldn't end up separated from the boat. If I fell in, my waders would have filled up with water and I'd have sunk to the bottom in seconds. All I could do was hold on and pray. We set off again, and Mick told me that rather than sitting down, I should straddle the seat directly behind him. That way, if the boat left the water for a second and came down with a bang, my legs would act like suspension springs. After about half an hour, the land behind me was vanishing fast. And so was my excitement about my first ever trip in a boat. The waves were getting quite rough now, and we were bouncing up and down like a trampoline. We'd started out speeding along about 33 knots, but now we were down to about 12. I decided the best policy was just to keep my eyes shut and use my ears instead. I knew that when I heard the engine note change, the boat had come out of the water and the whole thing was airborne. That was my signal to hold on extra tight and brace myself for the landing. I was concentrating really hard, but one time, I must have just lost focus for a second, because I slipped and nearly went over the side. That was when I started to get really scared. I was just about to ask Mick to slow down even more when I heard the engine roar again. I braced myself, but this time when the boat landed it hit a wave that was travelling sideways and rolled right over to one side. I fell and just managed to grab the edge to stop myself going over. I was rolling all over the place, and I was bawling like a baby until Mick stopped to have a look at what was going on. I was really shaken. I was convinced that I was going to die. That was going to fall out of the boat and Mick would be miles away by the time he realised not be able to find me before I went under. We set off again, this time a bit more slowly, and with me holding on tighter than ever, but I'd already decided that there was no way I was ever going to make this trip again. "How far is it across, Mick?" I asked. "About 70 miles. 70 miles? Fucking hell. I always thought the channel was about 22 miles wide. "Only between Dover and Calais," Mick explained. "Not between Blankenberg and Point Clear." "OK, well tell me when we're halfway." "Why?" "Just tell me when we're halfway." Then about half an hour later, "OK, Darren, we're halfway across now. Why the fuck are you so interested anyway?" "Well, if I do fall in, I want to know which way to swim." Slowly, the weather started to improve, so I started to play the maritime equivalent of, "Are we there yet?" I'd see the lights and say, "Hey, look over there, Mick, is that land?" "No, it's a boat." 5 minutes later, "Hey, how about that, is that land?" "No, that's a boat too." Then I saw a flashing white light. That wasn't land either, but some kind of marker buoy, which meant that the shore was about 12 miles away. I was starting to feel much better and much braver. The big waves had all gone and we were getting closer to home. We were still going fairly slowly, so I was actually starting to enjoy it, when I fell over again. I stood up for a minute, but then I fell again. I just couldn't seem to get a grip properly with my feet. My first thought was that we must have sprung a leak and the boat had started shipping water. I tapped Mick on the shoulder and pointed to the floor. We stopped, switched on a torch, and saw immediately that the main fuel tank had split. We couldn't see the actual hull, but we could see the fuel slowly leaking out. Naturally, I started to panic. After all, I didn't have Mick's experience, this was all new to me. But what really freaked me out was the fact that Mick started to panic as well. He said we'd have to sit on the seats even though it was more dangerous and made the boat less stable, and that we'd have to go as fast as possible to make sure we hit the shore before we ran out of fuel altogether. He reprogrammed the GPS so that we headed for the nearest bit of land rather than Point Clear. If we could get close enough, he explained, then Jack Womes, his backup man for all his new smuggling ventures, could always come out and get us in his speedboat. But if we ran out of fuel where we were, we'd have to call the Coast Guard, and that would mean dumping £70,000 worth of drugs over the side. We were flying along, and I was absolutely terrified. Mick was trying to work out where we were, but the GPS was playing up. He reset it to read the depth of the water rather than the location, so he could try to work out how close we were. But somehow he fucked it up. The whole screen went blank. So there we were in the pitch black, with no guidance system, totally lost, and with a boat that's pissing away fuel, going around in circles. Then Mick perked up and pointed to some poxy light he could see in the distance. He said it was definitely Clacton Pier, or maybe Walton Pier, and he knew where we were, probably. Either way, he reckoned we were only 4 miles from the coast. I was just gearing myself up to feel a bit more confident when right on cue the engine died and we ran out of fuel completely. We switched to the reserve tank, but that too was empty. We primed the carbs on the engine by hand and it started up, went about 50 yards and then stopped again. We kept on doing it and I had to rock the boat from side to side. The last thing I wanted to do, to try and get the last remaining splashes of fuel into the pipes. Then Mick managed to get the GPS working again. I don't know what he did. I don't even think he knew what he did. I just heard him say, "Fuck me, it's working again." And at last, we were going in the right direction. We had to kangaroo hop all the way, with the engine firing and dying every few yards. But when we got to about half a mile from the spot where Jack was, we realised it was just about shallow enough for me to get out and push the boat to the shore. So I did. I'd never been so happy to see Jack as I was when I saw him sitting on the beach waiting for us. I could have kissed him. He helped us drag the boat up to his Range Rover, and we started unloading the drugs. But the problems were far from over. The plan, as always, had been to unload the boat and then take it back out to the sea so we could come into Felixstowe and pretend we'd been out fishing or something. But with a split tank, there was no way that was going to happen, and the trailer was back at Jack's workplace, so we couldn't even move the boat. Mick and I were pacing around, telling Jack about our nightmare journey and trying to work out what the best thing to do was. We were so caught up in our own problems that we hardly heard Jack say that there was a problem with the Range Rover. It turned out that Jack had driven it down on the beach and gone over a pole stuck in the ground. He had wedged his axle and he was totally stuck. Mick was furious. Only a few minutes earlier, we'd radioed him and he had told us that it was safe to come into shore. "What is exactly your definition of safe, Jack?" Mick was saying. "Because I don't think being stuck on a beach with no car, no boat and a load of drugs fits in with my definition of safe." We took the drugs out of the Range Rover and hid them a bit further up the beach. Mick then stormed off to his mum's house, which was about a mile away, to borrow her car. While he was gone, Jack and I set about trying to get the pole out of the axle, but didn't have any luck. Mick came back about 3 AM and took the drugs to go and hide them in his mum's garage, so that was the main worry off our shoulders, and then he went off to get a chainsaw to try and cut the pole. In the meantime, Jack and I had tried a different technique, wedging bricks and stones underneath the wheels as they went into the air. It worked by the time Mick came back, and the Range Rover was free. Mick had to take his mum's car back, and Jack was going to follow him and then take him up to Ipswich where the trailer was and then bring it back so they could get the boat off the beach. In the meantime, they wanted me to sit around and stand guard. Great. Mick had picked up a few sandwiches and a drink from a garage, but I wasn't really in any mood for a picnic. I was fighting a losing battle to keep my eyes open and terrified that I'd drop off to sleep and the boat would be washed away. I ended up tying a rope from the boat around my ankle, then I curled up on the stones and fell asleep. I woke up a bit later to find my feet in the water and the boat tugging at my leg. The tide was starting to come in. I dragged the boat up on the beach and fell asleep again, only to be woken up by the water lapping at my feet once more. I was cold and miserable, I ached all over and I felt like I'd been there for days. It was just getting light when they finally came back. Mick had a go at me for dragging the boat up on the rocks because I'd scratched the base, but I just didn't care at all. All I wanted to do was get home. Jack dropped me at Mick's house, and I borrowed his Renault to drive home, nearly falling asleep at the wheel a couple of times. That meant that even though I was freezing cold, I had to drive with the window open. I was knackered by the time I finally got to bed. I didn't wake up until the middle of the afternoon, and I took Mick's car straight back to pick up my money. Once again he paid me in drugs, explained that he needed the cash to pay to get the boat fixed, and he ripped me off again by only giving me just over 2 grand's worth of grass. He said the shipment wasn't as big as he had planned, so he couldn't pay me more, but he'd make it up to me next time. And don't forget, he said, you owe me £200 for the drugs. I sold it all almost as quickly as I did the time before, and was rapidly building a reputation as a quality supplier. I took a load more orders and went round to Mick's to pick up some more. Only there wasn't any. Tate, along with Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe, had worked out some deal and bought the whole lot in one go. You've been listening to Blogs 19, written by Tony Thompson. This book is available to purchase online at Amazon and other online book retailers. Many thanks for joining me for this video. Very shortly you'll be able to see some other videos from the channel, including the Essex Boys playlist, which has all of the videos concerning this case in one convenient folder. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I look forward to seeing you all again in the next video. Take care. Cheers.